"You can go in there." The security guard barked, blocking the man in the lobby. "This area's for executives only." The man, calm, silent, holding a badge. But what the guard did not know was that the nobody he just humiliated was the new CO starting that day. What happened next flipped the entire company upside down. Watch the full story to see how one moment of prejudice unraveled decades of silence and built a legacy no one saw coming. He pointed at me right at my chest with his thick white gloved hand, eyes narrowing like he had just caught a criminal. "You do not belong here. Turn around." His voice was not raised, but it was sharp, cold, laced with something that made my blood run cold. I was not in a hoodie. I was not loitering. I was not shouting. I was not doing anything but walking into the office building I was expected to lead that morning. Still, the security guard stood firm, a badge shining from his navy uniform, like it granted him God-like judgment. Behind him, leaning against the marble concierge desk, another officer smirked, spinning a keyring like it was some power token, and I stood there, Elijah Carter, newly appointed CEO of Paramount Equity Holdings, being blocked from my own company on my very first day. Why? Because I was a black man wearing a simple button-up shirt and scuffed shoes. And that, to him, did not look like leadership. My name is Elijah Carter. I am 38 years old. I was born in the south side of Chicago, in a housing project that no longer exists, raised by a grandmother who cleaned offices just like this one. She used to come home with aching knees and cracked hands, still humming gospel songs as she stirred our dinner of canned beans and cornbread. I grew up on stories and sweat. I read by streetlight when the power got cut. And I prayed to a God I did not know yet if he heard me. When my grandma died, I was 15. The state came for me, but I ran before they could shove me into a group home. I lived in my beat-up Bic, parked behind libraries, eating day-old sandwiches from gas stations and applying to every scholarship I could find. Against every odd, I got into Harvard. I worked 3 jobs, slept 3 hours a night, and never let anyone know how close I was to giving up. And now, after 20 years of grinding, of climbing ladders I was never meant to touch, I was here on the brink of walking into my destiny, and this man, this guard, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Back off, or I call the cops." I stared at him, pulse heavy in my ears. I did not say anything at first, not because I was afraid, not because I did not have the words, but because I had been here before figuratively. Spiritually, there is a kind of silence black men are taught to master, the kind that does not provoke, the kind that does not get you killed. I clenched my jaw, lowered my eyes, and said quietly, "I have a meeting on the 38th floor. I am expected." He scoffed, looked me up and down. "Oh, really? You sure it is not the maintenance office in the basement?" I felt heat rush to my face, but I did not move. "Step aside, sir. I am Elijah Carter." The smirk disappeared, his brows furrowed, then quickly reset into mockery. "Yeah, and I am the mayor." He motioned to the other officer. "Hey, Mike, we got another one claiming to be royalty. Must be something in the air today." I reached into my pocket slowly, carefully, and pulled out my company-issued access badge, brand new, still in the plastic sleeve. He did not take it. Didn't he even look, just waved it away. Fake badges do not impress me. Buddy, now back off before I make this official. I blinked, the edges of my vision tunneling. I was not sure if it was rage or pain or exhaustion, or all of them crashing at once. I could see the glances from the front desk clerks, the whispers from 2 interns nearby who were obviously on their first week. One of them giggled. I was a punchline to them. I was a threat to him. And all I wanted to do was start my job. A woman in a sleek gray pantsuit walked past us. She looked at me, then at the security guard, then back at me with confusion. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. The guard did not even turn toward her. "Not anymore. I was just escorting this gentleman out." She looked at me again, really looked this time, and her lips parted. "Wait, are you Mayor Carter?" I nodded. Her eyes widened and she gasped. "You are the new CO. Oh my God." She turned to the guard. "Are you kidding me? Do you even know who this is?" The guard paled. He stammered. I did not know. He did not look, his voice trailed off. He did not look, that is all he had to say. I could have exploded right there. I could have demanded he be fired on the spot. I could have turned this lobby into a battlefield of justice. But I did not. I breathed. I held everything in like I always had. Because being a black man in America, especially one in power, means knowing when to push and when to preserve your peace. I looked him in the eye and said, "I look like every man you have ignored, every boy you have assumed did not belong. But today, I lead this building." The woman touched my shoulder. "Ma. Carter, please come with me. Let me show you to your office." I walked past the guard without another word. The silence behind me was louder than any apology he could ever give. As the elevator rose, I stared at my reflection in the metal walls. The collar of my shirt was creased. My shoes were worn. My skin was brown. My hair coiled tight like my mother's had. I thought of my grandma, of her prayers, of how she used to call me her little president. I thought of every teacher who told me to speak properly, every boss who laughed when I pitched an idea, every time I had to code switch just to survive. And now, here I was, rising, 38 floors above the men who thought I did not belong. I smiled, but not with joy, with purpose. When the doors opened, an assistant waited, holding a folder. She smiled politely, but there was hesitation in her eyes too. It would take time for them to see me not as the exception, but as the example. Time for them to learn. But I was not afraid of that. I had spent my whole life waiting to be let in. Now, I had the keys. And the next time someone said I did not belong, I would show them the door. My name is Elijah Carter. I am 38 years old. I am a black man in a country where that fact alone can determine how far someone assumes you will go. But let me tell you something they never saw coming. I was not supposed to be here. No one bet on me. No one paved a road for me. I carved one with bare hands. With hunger, with sleepless nights, and with dreams too stubborn to die. The man standing in the lobby yesterday did not know that he only saw skin, clothes, posture, but he did not see what it took for me to even stand upright in front of those golden elevator doors. I was born in South Side Chicago, in the kind of neighborhood you do not walk through after sunset unless you have got nothing to lose. My mother died giving birth to me. My father never met him. Not once. It was my grandmother, Loretta May Carter, who raised me. She was a janitor in downtown offices, cleaning the floors that white-collar men in shiny shoes marched across without ever looking down. She used to come home with swollen feet, reeking of bleach and determination. And every night, before bed, she would whisper the same thing. "You got a mind like a river, Elijah. Don't let 'em dam it up." We did not have bookshelves at home. We had stacks of newspapers and borrowed paperbacks. But Grandma taught me to read by candlelight when the power was cut. She taught me to count change when we sold sweet tea from our porch to save up for my school shoes. She taught me dignity, even when dignity did not pay rent. And when she got sick liver failure, they told us they could be caught it earlier if she had insurance. But we could not afford doctors. We could not afford to miss work. She passed when I was 15. I sat in that dim hospital room beside her body and I promised her, "I will get out. I will make you proud." After she died, they tried to send me to a group home. I ran instead. I lived out of my grandma's old Bic, parked in library lots, gas stations, behind rundown churches. I kept her Bible in the glove box. I showered in community centers, and I studied. God, did I study? During the day, I worked at a diner washing dishes. At night, I snuck into the back of public libraries and devoured textbooks. The librarians did not always welcome me. Once, a white security guard dragged me out because I fell asleep over a calculus book. He called me a vagrant, told me I was scaring the other patrons. I was 16. But even then, I never hated them. I did not have time for hate. Hate is heavy. Hope moves faster. So I kept moving. I filled out scholarship forms at 3. I begged my high school principal to let me retake the SAT after missing it the first time because my uniform pants got stolen, and somehow by miracle or madness, I got a full ride to Harvard. I remember the envelope. Gold crest, thick ivory paper. I held it in my hands and cried so hard I thought my ribs might snap. Harvard was a battlefield, not of guns but of glances, of assumptions, of backhanded compliments and invisible walls. The day I arrived, someone on my dorm floor asked me if I was the new janitor. I laughed like it was funny. It was not. My roommate was a trust fund kid named Braden, who thought poverty was a performance piece. I had to work 2 part-time jobs, campus mailroom, and late-night Uber driver to afford even the basics. And still, I walked into every class with my head up, sleeves rolled, and heart on fire. Finance found me in junior year. Numbers always made sense to me. Unlike people, they were honest. I joined a startup as an intern, got promoted within 6 months, and by graduation, I had offers from firms that once would not let me through their lobbies. I took the lowest paying one because it gave me mentorship. I rose fast. Too fast. Maybe. The higher I climbed, the more I saw the glass ceilings above others like me. I saw how they were patted on the back, never handed the baton. I did not want to be their exception. I wanted to break the system that made us exceptions. So, I built something of my own, a fintech startup that prioritized ethical investing and community reinvestment. It failed twice, but the third time, it exploded. I became a name in certain circles, invited to panels, quoted in op-eds, written about in Forbes. Still, the world saw a suit, not the skin underneath, not until Paramount Equity Holdings called me. "We want change," the chairman said. "We want someone who understands struggle." Real struggle. I did not believe them at first, but the offer came with no catch. They wanted me to lead. And yesterday, I showed up ready. Yet none of that mattered to the man with the badge in the lobby. None of it mattered to the interns who giggled as I was humiliated. All they saw was a black man with tired shoes. That is what this story is about. Not just about becoming CEO, but about what it means to be invisible even while achieving the impossible. About how no amount of degrees or titles or press releases can armor you against ignorance. But let me say this now. I am not ashamed of where I came from. I am not ashamed of sleeping in my car, of washing dishes, of learning by street lamp, because every crack in the pavement taught me how to plant roots. Every locked door taught me how to build my own keys. I am Elijah Carter, CEO, son of a janitor, graduate of survival, and I have only just begun. It happened on a Wednesday. Late October. The leaves in Cambridge had turned gold and crimson, but the air already smelled like frost. I remember the chill. I remember the way my hands trembled, not from cold, but from exhaustion. I had just finished a double shift at the dining hall, scrubbing pots so large they could fit my whole body, and my shoes already split at the sole squished as I walked across campus. Everyone else was headed to parties or poetry readings. I was headed to the Widener Library, hoping to find a quiet corner where I could study until they kicked me out or until my body gave in. Whichever came first. I did not expect to fall asleep, but I did, slumped over an economics textbook, surrounded by post-it notes and borrowed pens. When I opened my eyes, someone was tapping my shoulder, not gently. I looked up into the narrowed eyes of a campus guard. Tall, white, barrel-chested, with a shaved head and a sneer that told me I had already failed whatever test he was giving. "You can TB here," he said. I blinked. "Sir, I am a student." He shook his head. "You are loitering. You were sleeping. This is not a shelter." I stood slowly, carefully, trying not to look threatening. I must be dozed off. I will leave. But he was not done. He wanted to make a point. "You people think you can just use our resources. Sneak in like you belong." My heart pounded. I wanted to shout, wanted to ask. What people? What resources? Do you know how many hours I work to afford even this moment of rest? But I did not say anything, because I knew if I did, the story would change. I would go from tired student to angry black man, and no one would listen after that. He grabbed my student ID, inspected it like it was fake, then scoffed. "Ha! You really are enrolled here." He tossed it back at me. "Done to make it a habit." I nodded, gathered my books, and walked out, my head down. Outside, the cold slapped my cheeks. I sat on the stone steps and cried. Not because I had been embarrassed. I was used to that. I cried because no matter how hard I worked, how clean I kept myself, how respectful I tried to be, there was always someone ready to remind me that I did not belong. And that was not the first time, not even close. Back in high school, when I made honor roll 3 semesters in a row, one teacher accused me of cheating. "Boys like you do not pull grades like this," he said. When I asked him what boys like me meant, he said nothing, but the answer echoed in the way He ignored my raised hand for the rest of the year. When I got my scholarship letter, my bus driver, a black man himself, looked at it and said, "Don T, go gettin' soft out there. They will eat you alive." I smiled, but I knew what he meant. He was not bitter. He was warning me, like elders do before they send you into a storm. College did not shield me. It exposed me to people who thought diversity was a performance, who invited me to panels as the black voice, but never asked what I thought about the world, about economics, about change. I was the backdrop to their progressiveness, never the author. I remember one professor who praised my analysis in private but gave me a B because the others would complain if I graded you too generously. I remember walking into networking events and being asked, "Are you catering or security?" And I remember answering with a tight smile, "Neither. I am the keynote speaker." Still, I pushed, not out of spite, out of purpose. I knew what waited on the other side of every door they tried to close on me. I had seen it in the eyes of kids in my neighborhood, in the trembling hands of my grandmother, in the resigned sighs of men who used to dream. I was not just climbing for me. I was climbing for all of us. I did not tell people these stories. Not then, because to survive, I had to keep smiling, had to seem grateful, had to make sure they did not label me as difficult or entitled. I wore masks, code switched, laughed at jokes that stung, bit my tongue when they mispronounced my name or asked if I would ever been arrested. I played the game because I thought it was the only way to win. But with every insult, with every shove, with every time I was reminded of my place, something hardened in me. A resolve, a quiet fire. I started writing everything down, not in public. In a battered notebook I kept beneath my mattress, I wrote about every moment I was excluded, about how exclusion was not just being locked out, it was being watched too closely, talked to too loudly, ignored too easily. The notebook became my blueprint for who I would become, for what I would change. So when I stood in that lobby yesterday, and that guard tried to erase me with a gesture, he was not just seeing a tired man. He was facing years of storms I had survived, decades of being othered, dismissed, diminished, and still rising. He did not know that every insult, every rejection, had built the man standing before him. He did not know that I had once been thrown out of a library for falling asleep, but now I donated to libraries in my mother's name. He did not know that I had once been mistaken for staff at a networking event, and now I fund scholarships for staff's children to go to college. He did not know, because he did not care to ask. But now, he would have to listen. They all would, because this history, my history, was not just some backstory. It was a declaration. I am not here in spite of what I have endured. I am here because of it. And I am not going anywhere. The morning light poured through the massive glass facade of Paramount Hody Equaldings, like judgment from the heavens. It caught the polished marble floors and gleamed off the stainless steel fixtures, a temple to wealth and status. People moved swiftly through the lobby, heels clicking. Briefcases swinging, ties perfectly centered. The air smelled of money and peppermint-scented ambition. And right in the middle of it all, I stood motionless, stopped by a man who believed his polyester badge gave him the authority to judge who belongs. The guard, Rick, did not yell. He did not need to. his stance, his narrowed eyes. And the subtle shake of his head said everything. His presence declared, "This is not your place." And behind him, the judgment echoed not in words, but in the smirks, the sideways glances, the whispers. Across the lobby, 3 young men in crisp gray suits watched the scene unfold with lazy amusement. One of them nudged the other and chuckled. Security's on high alert today. Probably another food delivery guy trying to sneak upstairs. The other one grinned, eyes flicking to me. Or someone's cousin looking for a handout. I heard it, loud and clear. And even if I had not, I would have felt it, the ridicule, the dismissal, the comfortable cruelty of people who never had to fight for a place in the room. A woman in a red blazer, phone clutched to her ear, gave me a once-over and wrinkled her nose. She stepped wide, like proximity to me might somehow smudge her brand-new Louboutin heels. Another intern barely out of college snapped a selfie with the atrium behind her, catching me in the background. I knew how that caption would go. Wild morning at AQ. Some guy trying to crash the boardroom, lol. I was invisible and hyper-visible all at once. Seen, but not seen. Watched, but not acknowledged. It is a strange thing to be dressed in clean clothes, holding credentials, standing tall and still be assumed to be the problem. My clothes were not wrinkled today. My shoes were polished, my hair trimmed. And yet, the skin I was born in erased it all. I tried again, calm but firm. "Sir, please scan the badge. You will see I am scheduled for a meeting on the top floor." Rick scoffed. "You have been warned. Don T. Push it. Last chance before this becomes a bigger issue." He reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. I exhaled slowly. If I had been younger, less tired, less weathered, I might have shouted, might have demanded to speak to someone, might have made a scene, but scenes never help men like me. Scenes turn into headlines. Headlines turn into justifications. So I stayed still. A group of women from her walked past, talking about a new mental wellness initiative. One of them looked at me and quickly looked away. None stopped. None questioned why a man was being barred from their own building. No one asked if I okay. That was the part that stung, not the guards' aggression, but the silence of the bystanders, the willing ignorance, the practiced blindness of privilege. I glanced up at the Paramount logo, etched into the marble wall 30 feet wide. Gold-plated. Beneath it, the company's slogan gleamed, built on equity, rooted in trust. I almost laughed. Equity. Trust. I had not even stepped inside yet, and already the company I was about to lead was betraying both. Behind the front desk, the receptionist, young, white, anxious, whispered something to her colleague. I saw her fingers dancing over the keyboard. Then her eyes flicked up to mine. Something shifted. She leaned forward. Sir, could you please state your full name again?" I did. Her eyes widened. She looked back at the screen, then again at me. "You are Elijah Carter." I nodded. She stood, knocked over her coffee in the process. "I am so sorry." One moment. She picked up the phone, her voice high and panicked. "Yes, he is here. He is in the lobby." "No, yes. He has been here for 10 minutes. No. The guard would not let him through." "Yes, yes." I understand. She hung up and ran around the desk toward me. Carter, I apologize profusely. There has been a huge misunderstanding. Please, let me escort you up personally. Rick froze, his jaw clenched. Wait. What? The woman shot him a look I would seen 1,000 times, pity mixed with embarrassment. He is our new CO. Rick's face turned to ash. His mouth opened, then closed, like the words had betrayed him and fled. I did not gloat. Didn't he say I told you so? I just looked him in the eyes and held his gaze. I wanted him to sit with that moment, to remember it, to feel it, years from now, when he tries to explain to his own children what implicit bias is, when he tries to deny that he ever judged people based on appearances. We walked to the elevator. People moved out of our way now, as if the title itself had bathed me in legitimacy. But it was not the title that changed me. It was the fact that nothing about me had changed at all. I was still the same man, still the same skin. Same story. And yet now, suddenly, they all saw me. As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of the 3 young men, in suits the same ones, who laughed. Their smiles were gone now, replaced by wide eyes and slack jaws. I did not return the stare. I did not need to, because next time I walked through that lobby, they would remember, not just my name, but how close they had come to mocking a man who had climbed every rung of the ladder they were born standing on. And I had done it with less, much less. But I had something they would never understand. I had reason. The elevator carried me to the 38th floor, but my mind was somewhere else, stuck in a loop of faces, of echoes, of years I had spent swallowing pain in order to be palatable. As the assistant beside me tried to fill the silence with hurried apologies and corporate small talk, I stared straight ahead. I was not angry. I was tired. Tired of always having to earn humanity twice, once through character, and again through credentials. But this time was different, because this time, I was not just a guest in someone else's building. I was in charge of it. And that meant I had a choice. I could stay silent and let the story wash over, or I could speak and shake the foundation. When the doors opened, I nodded at the assistant but did not step out. Instead, I pressed the L button and let the doors close again. She turned, confused. Sir. Aren't you? I did not respond. I just shook my head gently, pulled out my phone, and hit dial. The name at the top of the screen read, Robert Linfield. Chairman. It rang twice. Elijah. Robert answered, his deep voice edged with warmth. Glad to know you made it in. We have got everyone ready in the conference room. Robert, I cut in, voice low but firm. I did not make it in. There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean, I have been standing in the lobby for the last 12 minutes being questioned, humiliated, and blocked by a guard who assumed I did not belong. Silence again, then a heavy sigh. Jesus, I am sorry. You do not need to be sorry, I said. But you do need to understand something. This is not just about me. This building has a sickness, and I am not here to decorate the infection. I am here to expose it. Robert hesitated. Do what you have to do. And with that, I hung up. The elevator hit the ground floor and opened again to the same lobby I had just been escorted from. The whispers returned. The stairs. The guard Rick still stood by the front desk, fidgeting now, visibly shaken. The receptionist spotted me and stood again, mouth slightly agape. I did not stop at the turnstile this time. I walked directly to the center of the room, pulled out my badge, held it high above my head, and tapped it against the security gate. The lock beeped green. I turned around. "My name is Elijah Carter," I said, voice rising just enough to cut through the marble acoustic silence. Some of you already know that. Most of you do not. But I want to make something clear. Today was my first day as CEO of this company, and I was nearly escorted out of the building by someone who refused to look past my skin. A few gasps. Someone dropped their coffee cup. I do not share this to embarrass. I continued, gaze locking onto Rick, who now stared at the floor, but to expose. Because if it happened to me, it has been happening to others. I guarantee it. Interns. Delivery drivers. Black staff. Brown staff. Women in hijabs. Men in wheelchairs. All silently pushed out of the way. Laughed at. Dismissed. Because they did not look like they belonged. Nobody said a word. I have spent my life staying quiet. I said, softer now. Playing safe. Smoothing edges. Trying to prove that I could be good enough. Respectable enough. Safe enough. But safe does not change anything. Silence does not build better companies. It only preserves broken ones. Then I walked, past the security desk, past Rick, past every person who still had not figured out what kind of man I was, up the elevator again, and as I rode to the 38th floor for the second time, I thought about every time I would held my tongue. Every boardroom I would been in where jokes flew like knives, and I just smiled to keep the room comfortable. Every time I would been told, "You are not like the others," and I would pretended that was a compliment. Every time I would bent myself to fit a mold I did not make. But now I was the one shaping the mold. I stepped into the executive conference room. The board was there. So were the department heads, the HR leads, and the per team. About 30 people. Mostly white, mostly middle-aged, mostly trying not to look surprised as I entered. Robert stood and gestured to the head seat. I did not take it. Instead, I walked to the window and looked out. "Before we begin," I said, turning to face the room, "I need to say something." They shifted in their seats. Pens stopped scribbling. Phones stopped buzzing. What happened to me downstairs is not unusual. It is just usually unseen, or ignored, or brushed aside. But this time, you are going to see it. All of it. I pulled a slip of paper from my jacket. On it were 3 names, people who had sent formal complaints about discrimination to her in the last 2 years. All 3 were now no longer with the company. None of those cases had been escalated. I laid the paper on the table. "Change starts here," I said, "with truth, with accountability, with people in this room not just nodding, but acting." And then I sat down at the head of the table. "Elijah Carter," CO. Not because I begged for it, not because I fit someone's mold, but because I earned every inch of it with scars. Silence, and now speech. Let them adjust. Let them get uncomfortable, because comfort was never the goal. Justice was. The stainless steel elevator doors parted with a quiet hiss. My footsteps echoed softly down the marble hallway, each step a beat of defiance. Each breath a reminder that I was no longer the one knocking, I was the one holding the key. At the end of the corridor, massive double-glass doors led to the executive boardroom of Paramount Equity Holdings. Behind those doors were 30 of the company's most powerful minds. Some had voted for me, most had not. But all of them were waiting. I adjusted my tie not out of nervousness, but to give my hands something to do. The fabric felt foreign against my skin. My hands still remembered the texture of rubber gloves from janitorial work. The grit of broken keyboards I repaired for extra money in college. The oil-slicked handles of late-night Uber shifts. This tie. This suit. This title, they were not a disguise. They were armor, and I would earn every thread. The assistant to my left fidgeted. Everyone inside, sir. They have been waiting for 20 minutes. Let them wait a little longer, I said, my voice calm. They have spent years pretending men like me did not exist. She did not know how to respond, so she just nodded and opened the door. And then, silence. 30 heads turned as I stepped in. The air shifted. It was subtle at first, like the way a room holds its breath before a thunderstorm. Robert Linfield, the chairman, stood slowly. Ladies and gentlemen, he said. Voice measured. This is Elijah Carter, our new CEO. I did not speak yet. I wanted them to look. Really look. Not at my resume. Not at the announcement email. Not at the highlight reel. I wanted them to look at the man in front of them. Black. Tall. Broad-shouldered. With dark skin and sharp eyes that had watched boardrooms from the outside for far too long. I let them sit in that discomfort for a full 5 seconds longer than was polite, and then I moved. Each step toward the head of the table was a silent confrontation. Some executives nodded stiffly, others avoided eye contact. One woman, the VP of Strategy, gave me a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. I would seen that smile before. It was the smile people used when they were deciding whether to speak to you with respect or with restraint. And then, as I placed my folder on the polished oak surface, I saw him, Rick, the security guard, standing in the back corner. Arms crossed, no longer holding authority, just shame. I locked eyes with him. He flinched. He was here because Fr insisted he give a formal apology, because Per suggested it might soften the optics if he witnessed the new CEO's introduction. But he had not come with humility. He would come because he was told to, because somewhere in him, he still believed he had only made a mistake, that this was all blown out of proportion, that I had taken things personally. He did not understand that it was personal, not because of pride, but because of history, because every act of dismissal, every sideways glance, every locked door was a brick in the wall that had kept men like me out of rooms like this for centuries. And now I was here. Not through invitation, through force of will, Robert gestured for me to speak. I did not go to the head chair. Instead, I stood behind it. Before we talk revenue, strategy, or vision, I began. We need to talk about the front door. A few shifted uncomfortably. Others straightened, sensing what was coming. 35 minutes ago, I stood in your lobby and was denied entry into this building by a man you hired to protect it. He did not ask for credentials. He did not scan my badge. He made a decision based on appearance, on assumptions, on comfort. His comfort, not mine. Looked down. A muscle in his jaw twitched. This is not about one man. I continued. This is about a culture, a pattern, blind spot so large it lets discrimination pass through unchecked. And if it can happen to the CEO of this company on his first day, it has absolutely happened to others. Maybe not all of them CEOs, maybe just interns, or delivery drivers, or janitors. But people who walked into this building hoping to be seen, and were told instead they were in the way. I paused, let the silence thicken. Let it wrap around their collars like a noose. You hired me because you wanted change, I said. So here's how it begins. There will be a full review of all security and her protocols. There will be bias training not once a year, but as part of our onboarding, as part of our culture, and there will be accountability. Real accountability, including mine. I turned to Rick. You can speak now, I said, evenly. He swallowed. I made an error. I did not know who you were. No. I replied. You did not care to know. His shoulders sagged. But now you do. So tell me, what will you do with that knowledge? Rick did not answer. He did not have to, because the whole room had heard it. I finally sat down at the head of the table. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, hands open, notebooks. Eyes lifted, one by one. Voices joined softly at first, then with clarity. The meeting continued. But something had shifted, not just the power dynamic. The narrative. I was not just the first black CEO in Paramount's history. I was the first to make them look in a mirror. And not everyone liked the reflection. But that was okay, because reflection comes before growth. Always. The boardroom, still humming from the confrontation moments earlier, had settled into a tense silence. Eyes darted toward me, toward Rick, toward each other, silent pleas to move on, to get back to the numbers, the slides, the safe language of balance sheets and quarterly projections. But I had not come here to read graphs. I came to hold a mirror to a company that had long chosen to ignore its own reflection. I opened the black folder before me and pulled out a single sheet of paper. No spreadsheets, no PowerPoint decks, no jargon, just names. 3 names. Before we proceed, I said, voice steady, I need to speak on behalf of 3 people who are no longer here. I slid the page forward across the table. Angela Hughes, Junior Marketing Analyst, resigned in 2022 after her complaint about racial stereotyping in her department was never escalated past her direct supervisor. I let the silence stretch. Devon Price. Maintenance staff. Fired after requesting time off to attend a discrimination hearing he was subpoenaed for. No, her documentation of the termination rationale exists. Murmurs. And finally, Maya Tran, intern, reported being mistaken for a janitor twice in 1 week by executive staff, requested sensitivity training for her team. Received none. Her internship was not extended. I looked up. You may not remember these names, but they remember you, and now so do I. A thick silence fell across the room. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else scribbled into a notebook, not out of urgency, but nervous habit. No one spoke. Paramount Equity Holdings, I said slowly, brands itself as a company of the future. We invest in innovation. We chase disruption. But we are still built on a culture that prioritizes comfort over justice, image over impact, and it stops today. I could feel their defenses rise, executives who had built their careers on professionalism, who saw diversity as a marketing line item rather than a lived reality. I knew what they were thinking. This is not our job. This is not our fault. I leaned forward. Let me be clear. I am not here to shame. I am here to rebuild. Then I picked up the remote and clicked the monitor on. It lit up with a simple headline. The culture audit begins now. Starting today, I said, every department will undergo a 3-phase internal review. Phase 1, anonymous employee surveys designed not by us, but by third-party equity consultants. Phase 2, department-level cultural assessments, including exit interviews, bias incident reviews, and upward feedback. And Phase 3, public transparency. Every finding, every failure, every flaw, we own it. We publish it. We fix it. Eyes widened. We are not doing this to look progressive. We are doing this to be accountable. There is a difference. A man at the far end of the table, David Corbin, SFO, raised his hand. With all due respect. Elijah, this kind of transparency could damage investor confidence. We have a fiduciary. Our fiduciary responsibility, I interrupted, is to lead ethically. If investors walk because we chose honesty over comfort, then they were never our partners. They were parasites. That shut him up. From this point forward, I continued, our metrics of success will include more than profit. They will include how we treat each other, who we promote, who we silence, who we lose, and why. I stood and walked to the windows again. Looking out over the city, the skyline stretched for miles, 1,000 buildings, 1,000 glass boxes filled with people who being told explicitly or silently that they did not belong. I spent too many years being the only black man in the room. I said, and I believed that if I just worked harder, if I spoke softer, if I wore the right tie, I could change the system from within. But systems do not change with silence. They change with truth. I turned back. We will become the blueprint. Not because we are perfect, but because we are honest. Because we are willing to rip the paint off the walls and fix the rot underneath. Then I pulled out a final sheet. This is the first executive team realignment proposal. I am creating a new position, Chief Equity Officer, independent from her. reporting directly to me, with hiring power, budget authority, and disciplinary input. Murmurs again, louder this time, but no one dared to object. And one more thing, I added. No more security protocols without full review. No more implicit bias training that lasts a single afternoon. No more performance reviews that ignore culture. This company will no longer reward quiet complicity. I sat down. The room was stunned. And then, to my surprise, someone clapped. One slow, deliberate clap. It was the youngest person in the room, a new hire, just weeks into the job, a queer Latina woman named Dani Morales. She stood up, her voice trembling. I have never seen anyone say this in a room like this. Thank you. Others joined. Some reluctantly, some with real conviction, some with confusion, but they clapped because deep down, even the ones who feared change knew it was overdue. The dam had cracked, and now the truth was flooding in. I looked around the room and did not see power anymore. I saw responsibility, and they saw me not just as a CEO, but as a leader. It started with a blink. A low-resolution video, barely 30 seconds long, uploaded anonymously to a new Twitter account with no followers and no name. The clip was grainy but clear enough. You saw the lobby of Paramount Equity Holdings. You saw the polished marble floor. You saw me, Elijah Carter, standing at the turnstile. And you saw him, Rick, one hand on his hip, the other stretched out like a wall. His voice, caught on audio. You do not belong here. Step away before this becomes a bigger problem. My response was quieter, too quiet to hear. But the tone, the posture, the look in Rick's eyes said it all. And the caption, just 4 words. This is the CEO. Within an hour, it hit 10,000 views. By midday, 5 million. By sunset, it was global. News anchors called it the CEO incident. Headlines range from CEO racially profiled on first day to the lobby that ignited corporate America. Hashtags swirled. Hash Litalijahin. Hash redefining belonging. Hash Paramount Truth. And suddenly, Rick was not just a security guard. He was a symbol, the face of every unchecked gatekeeper, every subtle humiliation, every time someone like me was made to feel invisible. And Paramount became a case study. At first, the company tried to stay ahead of it. Per sent out a soft statement. We regret the incident and are committed to a culture of inclusion. It did not work. People wanted more than regret. They wanted accountability. They wanted action. And they wanted names. I sat in my office, watching the views climb. The clip played on every screen, MSNBC, even late-night shows. Comedians joked about it. Activists rallied around it, and my inbox filled with stories. Thousands, people writing from every state, every background. That happened to me. They did the same to my son. Thank you for saying something. And amidst the noise came silence. From Rick. He had not spoken publicly. He had not apologized. He had not even responded to her request for a meeting. Until day 3. He showed up in my office. No knock, just walked in still in uniform. But the power was gone. He looked smaller, paler, sweating beneath the collar. "I need to speak to you," he said. I looked up, calm, ready. "You have already said everything that mattered," I replied. "And so has the world." He stepped forward. "Look, I did not mean it like that. I did not know. If I would known who you were, that is the problem." I interrupted. "You think respect is reserved for people with titles. What would be changed if I were an intern or a janitor? Would you have still treated me like a threat?" He said nothing. I leaned forward. "You did not stop me because you were doing your job. You stopped me because I did not look like your idea of authority. And that is not protocol. That is prejudice." He looked down. And for the first time since I would met him, he looked ashamed. I stood. "Your contract is terminated. Effective immediately. You will receive your final pay through her. You may file a statement if you choose, but you will no longer be employed by this company." He nodded. No protest. No excuses. He left, and just like that, the symbol fell. But the work was far from over. The video had opened wounds. Now came the reckoning. In the following days, our inbox received over 80 internal reports of microaggressions, unfair performance reviews, blocked promotions, cultural ignorance masked as policy. Names surfaced. Managers long protected by performance metrics were exposed for quietly holding others back. Teams once praised for efficiency revealed to be hostile and homogeneous. We launched an internal investigation publicly, posted real-time updates on the website. Employees could track actions taken. Changes made. Reforms passed. We let the world watch us break. Because that is how you build something honest. For the first time, people in this company, black, brown, immigrant, disabled, queer, began speaking without fear. Stories poured out during open forums. Tears flowed in rooms where silence had once ruled. And through it all, I did not hide behind glass doors. I stood among them, listened, hurt with them, grew with them. Rick was gone, but so were others, managers who de-shielded dysfunction, directors who de-turned their heads, executives who de-laughed at jokes they should have silenced. In their place, new leaders emerged, people who knew what it meant to be left out. People who did not just talk diversity, they lived it. The board approved a restructuring plan that embedded equity into every layer of leadership. Salaries were audited, pay gaps exposed and corrected. Recruitment pipelines were rebuilt from the ground up. Starting with high schools in underserved neighborhoods, we stopped chasing optics. We started building outcomes. And the media, they kept watching. But now, they reported differently. From Paramount's shame to Paramount's transformation. Because something strange had happened in the fallout. We did not run from the fire. We walked through it, and people followed. Investors called not to pull out, but to partner. Employees stopped quitting. Talent once ignored now rose. And for the first time, I felt it, not just respect, but momentum. The kind that does not come from power, the kind that comes from truth. It arrived in a small, Unmarked cardboard box, no logo. No wrapping, just brown paper and rough tape. My assistant placed it gently on the edge of my desk. "This came for you, sir," she said. "No return address." I nodded, dismissed her with a quiet thank you, and waited until the door closed behind her. Then, slowly, I peeled back the tape. Inside was a wooden plaque. Not the typical gold-rimmed brass nameplate, like the ones that lined the offices down the corridor. This one was hand-carved, uneven, smooth in some parts, rough in others. My name was etched into the surface with gentle imperfections. The letters slightly crooked, as if made with love instead of precision. Elijah Carter, CO. But beneath it, in smaller letters, burned into the grain of the wood, was a single line. Grandson of Loretta May Carter. Cleaner. Warrior. Sent. My breath caught. I knew that handwriting. It was from Murr Hines, the old woodworker who ran the tiny shop back in South Side Chicago. He had been my grandmother's friend for decades. When she passed, he carved her casket by hand because we could not afford a proper one. I had not seen him in years, but somehow he had seen me now. I ran my fingers over the grooves, feeling the letters like they were scripture, and suddenly I was not in a glass tower anymore. I was 12 years old, sitting on my grandmother's lap as she massaged her sore feet, whispering stories of who I could be if I just kept walking. And now I had arrived. But this was not the end of the road. It was the beginning of a new one for others. I stood, carried the plaque gently to the door of my office, and removed the polished brass nameplate they had installed on my first day. It came off with a click, cold, perfect, impersonal. I replaced it with a wooden one. There were no screws, just double-sided tape and a quiet prayer. And when I stepped back, I smiled, because it did not shine, it did not gleam, it did not boast, it simply belonged. A few employees passed by in the hallway, pausing mid-conversation as they noticed the change. Some whispered. One young black intern stood still for a moment, staring at the sign with a quiet reverence. Then he smiled and kept walking. That was the moment I knew this door was not just mine anymore. It was a message, a symbol, that titles did not erase history. They carried it. That leadership did not mean standing above. It meant opening the door wider. Later that day, I called a press conference, not for optics, for clarity, for legacy. I stood behind the podium, the Paramount logo behind me, and faced the flashing cameras. "I am not a miracle," I said, voice steady. "I am the result of sacrifice, of teachers who did not give up on me, of janitors who fed me truth between shifts, of a grandmother who cleaned your offices with cracked hands, so I could one day walk into them with purpose." Reporters scribbled. Some cried. This plaque behind my door, I continued, is not a decoration. It is a reminder that no matter how far we climb, we must remember the floor we started on, and we must make sure that floor becomes safer, stronger, and more welcoming for whoever steps on it next. I took no questions, because nothing more needed to be said. Later, I walked through every floor of the building, not in a parade, not for fanfare, but to look my employees in the eyes, to see their desks, their photos taped to monitors, the half-finished coffees beside spreadsheets and sticky notes. I wanted to know them, all of them, not just their roles, but their stories. And everywhere I went, someone told me one, of feeling unseen, of being passed over, of almost giving up, and each time I listened, not with answers, but with presence. And at the end of the day, when the office lights dimmed and the city glowed outside the windows, I returned to my desk and sat quietly for a long while. I did not feel powerful. I felt responsible, to lead with softness, to speak when others stay silent, to ensure that what happened in that lobby never happens again, not just here, but anywhere, because the truest legacy is not what we build. It is who we lift as we rise. The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows of Paramount Equity Holdings, casting long golden beams across the polished lobby floor. The atrium buzzed with energy, employees streaming in, phones pressed to ears, coffee in hand, laughter drifting through marble and steel. But when the elevator doors slid open and I stepped out, no suit jacket, no entourage, just a quiet presence, something shifted. People stopped, not out of fear, out of reverence. I walked slowly, deliberately, past the exact spot where I had once been blocked, where I had once stood holding a badge that meant nothing to a man who could not see past my skin. Now, there were no barriers, no outstretched hands, no sideways glances. Only respect. Rick was gone. The old plaque was gone. The unspoken rules were gone. And in their place was something new. Something fragile, but real. I paused in the middle of the lobby, where the incident that changed everything had unfolded. A few staff members nearby looked up from their desks. Janitor, a Latina woman in a navy jumpsuit, caught my eye and smiled. I nodded back. She had been here the day it happened. She had seen it all. Now she saw something else. I pulled a small folded paper from my pocket. It was not part of any speech. It was not planned. It was something I had written months ago in a coffee shop, when I was still questioning whether I could accept this role, whether I would be accepted in it. I unfolded it and began to read aloud, not to the crowd, but to myself. To anyone who has ever been told they do not belong, to anyone who has been mistaken for less, for invisible hands cleaning invisible rooms, for students who study in parking lots, for sons of janitors, for daughters of maids, for dreamers walking through side doors and service elevators, hoping to one day walk through the front. You belong. You always have, even when they could not see it. When I looked up, the lobby was silent again, not out of shock, out of recognition, because in that moment, every person in that space, executive or intern, security or janitor, knew this was not about me anymore. It was about all of us, about what we choose to see in others, about what we choose to become. I turned toward the main entrance, where the glass doors led to the city outside. I walked slowly, passing the new digital wall display. We had installed a screen that showed rotating faces of our employees, not just executives, but everyone. Maintenance, mailroom, cafeteria staff, customer care, A visual promise. We see you. And as I reached the doors, they opened automatically. But I stopped, turned around, and faced them all. I was never supposed to make it here, I said quietly, and that is exactly why I had to. Then I stepped outside, into the light, into the noise of the city I once wandered through with cracked shoes and empty pockets, into a world still full of gatekeepers, still full of rooms built for some and barred from others. But now, I walked with something they could never take from me: truth, and the courage to speak it. They had built this place with cold stone and clear glass. I would rebuild it with something stronger: compassion, conviction, and the memory of every closed door I had ever forced open. Behind me, the lobby filled with footsteps again. Life resumed, but different. Eyes were wider now, hearts softer, walls thinner, and hanging quietly above the security desk where once Rick had stood like a sentry was a new sign. Dignity is not earned through title. It is given through humanity. People stopped to read it. Then they walked through it. And that is how change happens. Not all at once, but door by door, voice by voice, truth by truth. And one day, someone who once felt small will stand where I stood, and they will not be stopped. They will be welcomed, because we made it so. Elijah Carter's story is not just about a man who rose to power. It is about the walls he had to climb, the silence he had to break, and the truth he chose to tell when it would have been easier to stay quiet. On his very first day as CEO, he was profiled, humiliated, and almost erased. But instead of lashing out, he used that moment as a mirror forcing an entire company, and the world watching, to confront a hard truth. Bias does not always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a tie. Elijah did not walk through the front doors of that tower to seek validation. He walked in to create space for the overlooked, the underestimated, the dismissed. And when he hung a handmade wooden nameplate on his office door, carved with his grandmother's name, he reminded all of us, we are not just our titles, we are our history, our pain, our resilience. His journey is a powerful reminder that real leadership is not about power. It is about presence. It is about listening. It is about truth. And the most powerful change does not always start with a megaphone. It starts with a whisper, a memory, a refusal to be silent one more time. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Elijah's journey, if you believe in a world where everyone deserves a seat at the table, subscribe for more stories that uplift truth and justice. Comment below with your thoughts. Have you ever been in Elijah's shoes? Share this video to remind the world we all belong. Because sometimes the most powerful revolution begins the moment one man says, I belong here.